Donald Trump has always been easily manipulated. He craves flattery, and world leaders, especially authoritarian ones, have used that to their advantage. They've played him publicly and repeatedly. But now, it's not just strongmen taking advantage of that weakness. President Zelensky has managed to turn Trump around completely, pushing him into the biggest reversal of his entire administration. Suddenly, Trump is breaking with his longtime ally Vladimir Putin and making a surprising announcement that, for once, actually gives a bit of hope. We're going to unpack what this means for the administration's foreign policy moving forward. But before we dive in, if you're enjoying the channel, please leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It really helps support our work. Now, before we get into Trump's remarks to President Zelensky today in New York, let's take a look back at what he was saying about Ukraine just 1 week ago.
Mr. President, you say that President Putin has let you down. Have negotiations run out of road, and what are your next steps to compel an end to this war?
Well, he has let me down. I mean, he's killing many people, and he's losing more people than he's killing. I mean, frankly, the Russian soldiers are being killed at a higher rate than the Ukrainian soldiers. But, yeah, he said, let me down. I don't like to see it's death. You know, it doesn't affect the United States. We have, other than unless you end up in a world war over this thing, you could. This was a thing that would have never happened had I been president. If I were president, it would have never happened. And it didn't happen for 4 years. Most people agree it didn't happen, nor was it close to happening. And I spoke to President Putin about Ukraine. It was the apple of his eye. I've said that many times. It was. But he would have never done what he did, except that he didn't respect the leadership of the United States.
For most of his administration, Donald Trump's stance on the war in Ukraine has been either dismissive or indifferent. At times, he said the conflict should simply be resolved between Putin and Zelensky, even though he once promised that he could settle it himself. Other times, he's acted like it wasn't worth his attention and moved on to other issues. That position has been not only irresponsible, given that Ukraine is a U.S. ally, but also a terrible strategy. Right now, Ukraine has momentum and is making real gains against Russian aggression. With proper support, they could push even further. And that's why it's so critical to revisit the strategy outlined by Senator Chris Murphy, which sets the stage for understanding just how significant Trump's latest announcement really is.
That is in part because our sanctions are directly levied on Russia, and there's very limited economic relationship between the United States and Russia. These next sanctions that we're talking about, that Congress is considering authorizing, are actually secondary sanctions, sanctions that would make it hard for Russia to continue to do business with countries like China and India, who are essentially funding the war. So this next set of sanctions could be much more impactful. The problem is, in the Senate, the Republican leader won't even bring up a vote, a debate on this bill, because Donald Trump doesn't even want a discussion about these sanctions because he's so worried that it might upset his great friend Vladimir Putin. What is most impactful, and what will be most impactful on this war, are more weapons for Ukraine. And here's where Putin has the upper hand. So long as Trump is still opposed to continuing to arm Ukraine, Putin knows that it is just a matter of time before he can gain the advantage. So Putin walks away from the summit with no economic sanctions, with no sense that Trump is going to continue to send weapons to Ukraine, and essentially a green light to continue the war on his terms.
Let me ask you about
the Ukrainians are winning this war, and to say anything else is a complete misreading of what's happening right now. Putin is seeing his forces destroyed every day, losing more and more Russian lives as he is unsuccessful in his invasion of Ukraine. The bravery that we've seen out of the Ukrainians is inspiring, and the leadership of Zelensky is something that should be studied for generations to come, which is why Donald Trump just being so apathetic towards the war was so idiotic. Zelensky is winning and can win. And it seems like he has convinced Trump of that fact, completely playing the president and getting him to post this and make two important announcements in their meeting that I want to check out after we read this post. In a shock post on Truth Social, Trump wrote, "After getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine, Russian military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. Why not? Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it is very much making them look like a paper tiger. When the people living in Moscow and all other great cities, towns, and districts all throughout Russia find out what is really going on with this war, the fact that it's almost impossible for them to get gasoline through the long lines that are being formed, and all of the other things that are taking place in their war economy, where most of the money is being spent on fighting Ukraine, which has great spirit and only getting better. Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form, and who knows, maybe go even further than that. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any event, I wish both countries well. I don't know what that means. We will continue to supply weapons to NATO for NATO to do what they want with them. Good luck to all. Saying good luck to all might sound careless, but it's clear that Donald Trump's feelings were bruised because Vladimir Putin never gave him the admiration he was hoping for. Meanwhile, President Zelensky played the long game, ultimately convincing Trump to take the position he should have held from the very beginning, standing with our allies and supporting the side that is clearly gaining ground in this war. Even Zelensky himself seemed a bit surprised, as you'll see in this clip, by how Trump is now responding to questions about Russian aggression.
Any questions?
Mr. President, do you think that NATO countries should shoot down Russian aircraft if they enter their airspace?
Yes, I do.
Mr. President?
Did you catch President Zelensky's reaction when Donald Trump suggested that Russian aircraft in NATO airspace should be targeted? His face said it all, almost like, wait, what just happened? The surprise was real. Now, whether this change in tone lasts is another question, and I'm not about to applaud Trump just yet. Supporting Ukraine and standing against Russian aggression shouldn't be shocking. It should have been the U.S. position from the very beginning. This is the role of an ally, and this is what defending democratic nations requires. What's striking here is that Trump is no longer praising Putin. In fact, he was even taking verbal shots, as you'll hear in his exchange with President Macron.
We'll see what happens, but the other side can fight too, and they've proven that. Maybe it could be that Russia's a paper tiger. I don't know what they are, but 3.5 years of fighting and killing everybody, of killing 7,000 people a week for nothing, So it's a very sad situation, but most of you have seen the recent statement I put out a little while ago, and I'm glad you got it. But I feel that way. I really do feel that way. Let them get their land back. Yep. So we'll see how it all works out. And in the meantime, I hear France is doing well.
I don't even know if this was Donald Trump actually mocking Vladimir Putin. To me, it sounds more like Putin overplayed his hand, thinking he could influence Trump forever. And honestly, that assumption makes sense because Trump has often been swayed by flattery, but now it looks like his ego has been bruised, and that's why I'm not giving him too much credit just yet. If major U.S. policy is being shaped simply by who treats him nicely in a given week, that's a serious concern. Only a few weeks ago, Trump was proudly showing photos with Putin in the Oval Office. And now his tone has shifted completely. This is where President Zelensky has stepped in wisely. He understands Trump's personality and has figured out how to guide him, making him feel like the strong leader in the room while also securing support for Ukraine and NATO. This is sharp diplomacy. Zelensky has played the long game, using strategy to push Trump toward stronger positions against Russian aggression. What's surprising is that Trump, who has always talked about how other countries were unfair to the U.S. and relied on tariffs as his tool, is finally applying pressure where it should have been from the start. On Putin, it's shocking to see this turnaround. If it holds, it could bring a step toward stability. But given the unpredictability we've seen so far, I'm not getting ahead of myself. The chaos of this administration has been clear to all, and it was summed up perfectly by Vice President V.P. Harris.
Part of what I write about. This stuff is decades in the making, Rachel. It didn't just happen overnight. You know, so much of what has indeed overwhelmed people, not to mention just scared the stuff out of people, is what we are witnessing is a high velocity event.
Yeah.
We are witnessing something that has been happening so rapidly, and it feels chaotic. But what I would offer you is what we are witnessing is the swift implementation of a plan that was decades in the making. Decades in the making. Project 2025 didn't just drop out of thin air. That's a product of decades of work. Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation. Understand that the implementation of a plan that's about trying to get rid of the Department of Education, deregulate industries, weaken the rule of law by over a period of time, creating a system and through gerrymandering states so that we would now have the Supreme Court that we have. This stuff didn't happen overnight, and it did not happen just because of an election in 2024 or even 2016.
We've been living in a state of constant chaos, and while I don't want to get too hopeful, the fact that Donald Trump has shifted his tone on the war in Ukraine, even if it comes from his usual self-centeredness, is still significant. That change is huge, and the credit goes entirely to President Zelensky. He has worked tirelessly, sometimes having to navigate Trump's ego in ways no leader should have to, but he's done it with strategy and purpose. Zelensky has shown himself to be both courageous and incredibly smart, a leader who deserves recognition and respect. Hopefully this new approach from Trump lasts, because at this point it looks a lot like the Ukraine policy we saw under President Biden. We'll keep following this story closely. If you'd like to support the channel, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and if you stayed until the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I will see you soon.